Hello and welcome to the King's Coalition. This is this week's blog post, podcast, all of the content, and it was me who wrote the blog post yesterday. It was called When God Feels Far. What if he's closer than ever? And there's a little bit of a background story that I should get into before we get into the content today. I'm with Tim again, who's going to be helping stimulate the conversation and bring some of insights that he's been thinking of as he's looked at the blog post as well, and as we talk today. But I'm currently doing a spiritual formation class. Tim and I were talking about this off air before we pressed record, and it's for my master's in Christian apologetics at Biola at Talbot School of Theology. And before going into it, I kind of looked down upon it, kind of like, do I really need spiritual formation? I mean, I'm supposed to be at a seminary getting my master's degree. Surely we should be diving into deep philosophical stuff and theological stuff, and we do that a lot. But this is such a pivotal part of our Christian walk that we really, especially those in academia, we really miss the importance of this. And there's a whole stem of this now called spiritual theology, and really emphasizing the importance of incorporating word and spirit together. And in one of the articles that we were supposed to be reading at the time of recording for this week, there was a section of it that I thought, I have to talk about this. This is so important to talk about because it's so relevant to me, and if it's relevant to me, I'm sure it's relevant to everybody else too. So in light of me not talking all the time, I'm just going to ask Tim, can you remember, like, when you first became like a Christian, the first time you really kind of took that seriously, like, talk me through what that felt like in regards to feeling close to God's presence. And then did you, like I have, and I think that the majority of us have, gone through that phase where you're like, hang on a minute, I'm still a Christian, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. Like I don't have God's presence really in my life at the moment, and that seems strange. Like I felt that way. Did you feel that way? If so, like, tell us that side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, pretty much exactly what you said. Like, I was raised in a Christian household. I've always believed as far as I can remember. And so I didn't have, I'm sure I did have a literal come to Jesus moment, but, I can't remember it. I can't remember when I did. I was quite young. But yeah, on and off all through my childhood, there was a sense of, I would have greater and lesser senses of like, oh, the Lord is here. The Lord is with us. The Lord is doing this. And there were times when I'd feel like, I feel like I'm being led to look into this and look at that. And, you know, especially in my sort of early teens, I was very much like, you know, I want the Lord to lead me. I want the Lord to guide me. I want to do like every day with Jesus. You know, I don't want to be left to my own devices. And yeah, and then there'd be times when, usually for me, it would be like, stuff would happen. Difficult circumstances would unfold, or a friendship would you know, disintegrate, or you know, I would wake up with the flu, and there'd be an automatic feeling of like, where is God? As I'm sitting here, like, you know, and I, you know, had to kind of just navigate that through my teens. But I think, yeah, absolutely, the sort of the more kind of the greater dark nights of the soul for me have been in more recent years, have been when, you know, I lived out here in the US for several years, then moved back to the UK. And the entire kind of trajectory of my life, you know, upended. And I was confronted with, like, I put God in a box that was very much focused towards where I thought my life was going. And suddenly it's going in this completely different direction, and things are going terribly. You know, I'm losing friendships, relationships are failing. Like I'm going through a kind of deconstruction process, and I'm going, okay, where are you, Lord? Where is God in this emotional turmoil, in this fear, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, like coming from a very charismatic kind of word of faith upbringing, those times are particularly scary because to me that it felt like something was being said about my own faith, about where I was at. Have I somehow like disconnected myself from God? Have I somehow like stepped out of faith and, you know, messed things up? And how do I get back? Because I really, really want to get back. So yeah, absolutely. Both I've experienced both very much the highs and very much the lows in my Christian walk thus far, and I presume I will continue to as the years go by.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can only speak freely, and we're going to get into some of the stuff of the blog post because it is so profound, and it's not profound in my sense. Like I didn't write this. I've essentially just found something that I thought was profound and thought we should talk about it. We should share it. So when I say it's so profound, I'm not saying that what I wrote was so.
Well,
profound.
okay, Danny. Okay, calm down.
Listen to me. Like I am the enlightened one now. This was just so good. And from my perspective, when I think I do know when I became a Christian, and it's kind of a weird phrase because I didn't grow up in a Christian home, but I was sent to Christian schools. And as you would know, Tim, I don't know if it's still the same in the UK. Like you and I are two expats now that live in the US, so we don't really know a lot of what's going on in the UK. But I'm not sure if the school system is the same. At least when I was growing up, the church was really incorporated into different churches. Like you had the Church of England school, you had a Catholic school, and I was sent to a Church of England school, not because my parents wanted to have a Christian influence in my life. They weren't Christians. They liked the head teacher, and that's it. They told me, they said go there. And the secondary school, as we say in the UK, is an affiliation of that primary school. So I just went there, and it was a joint Church of England Catholic school. So that's where I went. And I don't think I was ever really a Christian at that point. Even I guess I would be more of a cultural Christian, and I sort of believed perhaps that Jesus was Lord and God exists, and I did try and pray every once in a while, but I think I do remember a time and then I did become a Christian, and I did have what I thought was a pretty supernatural moment when people laid hands on me, and it did feel like the presence of God was very, very real and tangible, and I kind of like rode that wave for a long time. And now being in a different church community and studying a lot more than I ever have before, I've now, through that, nuanced my views here or there. I haven't changed too much, but I have, there are different views that I've got of different things. Like you and I mentioned on our previous podcast episode that we did together, that there's still core doctrines, the essentials, as we say, but the nuance there is nuance there.
Absolutely.
But through that process, it felt as if God's presence was waning more and more, and it was starting to feel like, am I doing something wrong? Should I not be feeling this way? The views that I think should be changed in my life, should they actually be remaining? Or do I have to have a completely different reshaping of what Christianity looks like if I have to remove some of this stuff that I'm just wrestling with right now? And I thought I was literally just alone on this. And honestly, it wasn't until I read this article that we were supposed to be reading for simply a course requirement, I was like, wow, there's actually a lot here that I hadn't actually thought of before. So the article was written by one of the professors at Biola, Dr. John Coe, and his whole emphasis really is on spiritual theology and what that is, and true formation of the human spirit, and again, and what that looks like as they wrestle with the word, and they wrestle with their own life and their own spiritual walk with the Lord. And there were two definitions that he brought up that writers have been wrestling with this for thousands of years. like this is not a new thing. This is something that's really real and tangible in all of our walks. And the first, and what they're called is the consolation and the desolation. The consolation presence of God, and like the desolation presence of God. And we need to unpack those. But the first one, the consolation, Professor John Coe explains, he says, and I quote, "Consolation for the beginner is often a filling of the spirit ahead of one's character, meant to encourage faith and reinforce the practice of spiritual disciplines." That's such a profound definition of what that means. And I say, simply put then, consolation comes with an undeniable sense of God's presence. And what's so profound about that is, if we look back and we say, wow, when I first became a Christian, or when I was just walking with the Lord, I had this amazing moment, and I wonder, how can I get that back? Well, let's not think about it that way. Let's just think about the initial moment that you had with the Lord. It's amazing that the Lord gives us that. Like, he starts the journey with such a profound presence of his spirit, and it may not be a fantastic conversion story. It may just be something as simple as, did you at that moment feel God was near? Or maybe not at that moment, but like maybe a couple years later you did. And that is such a like I said, it's such an important part of it. But the whole purpose is not to stay there. Like, we want to stay in that wonderful moment of just God's presence just being with us. And he says that we're not supposed to stay there, because he doesn't just call it a consolation. This is how Dr. Coe mentions it. He calls it the infant consolation. And when he said that, I thought, he is really onto something here. And this is where the desolation comes in. And this is to add upon the consolation part. This is to really hone in on what we're trying to talk, what we're trying to discuss. So he says that and there's multiple facets with this, but the first point of the desolation is that it feels like God's presence is withdrawing from you. It feels like this is not the same anymore, Lord. Like, I felt like I was on fire for you. It felt like you were really close. It was great. We used to talk all the time. It's like, what is happening? It's like the beginnings of a relationship. It's like, oh, we used to talk all the time. Like now we don't really talk as much. Like what is this all about? And we can interpret that to mean that the relationship is failing. It's falling apart. His presence is gone from us.
Yep.
But I bring out 4 points. Well, I don't bring out 4 points. Dr. Coe brings out 4 points, but I like to split it up. 3 points. I like to split it up into 3 points. And he says here that the desolation side, when it feels like God is withdrawing from you, actually it may be a sign that God is not withdrawing his presence, but he's withdrawing the infant consolation, and is actually there according to the person's character. And that was such an eye-opening sentence, and I thought, that really speaks to me, and I wonder if others have been in that place where actually it's not the fact that God is far from you, because that's really a kind of a silly statement in itself. If this is the omnipresent being, of course he's not going to be far from you. He's always there, but it feels that he's far. He feels that he's distant, but he's actually there, withdrawing that infant consolation out, and he wants you to go deeper into a relationship with you. That he may have been so close to you because he was literally walking you along, like you do with a brand new infant. You have to teach them everything. Like you are their only source of comfort, of nutrition, of safety. That's it. But there does come a point, and I'm learning this now with a 2-year-old, there comes a point where you have to withdraw that infancy side in order for them to actually grow. And it may feel like to them that you're not as close anymore. It's like, actually, I'm still here. I just need you to go a step further. And that is such an encouragement. Absolutely. Have you felt that like recently as well, like in your walk? Because I feel like you and I have similar walks, not exactly the same, but you and I have had similar experiences, I suppose we'll put it that way. And can you see, I'm not saying that I've given you all the answers to life's problems, Tim, sure, but can you see
very decent of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, this is it. 3 steps and you're done, man. But can you see how, like, perhaps, and maybe an encouragement to others that may be watching, like perhaps actually what you're going through right now, if you feel like God's presence is far away, actually he may just be not withdrawing his presence, but just withdrawing the infancy that you've been so used to. And he's telling you, I think you need to go on your own now. I'm going to be with you. But I think you need that little bit of a push or that withdrawing of that infancy in order to go further.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, calling upon the last couple of years of my life, there was a sort of, at my lowest ebb, I suppose you could say, like, I was back in the UK. I had no idea what I was doing with my life. Like, all my kind of career aspirations and hopes had collapsed. I'd left my whole social world in the US, and my faith was kind of all over the place. I didn't know what to believe, and I was like, okay, there's a couple things that I kind of, for my own like almost sort of academic integrity, I have to hold on to. There's been miraculous stuff in my life that cannot be explained on a purely secular humanistic lens, and so it's like, okay, God is real. That's it. That's the only certainty right now, and going through that, I described it at the time as very much a crucible of the soul. A crucible being like, I'm probably going to get this terribly wrong, but it's like the part of the furnace that is the hottest. It's where you put all the heavy metals, and until they slowly burn into liquid, and all of the impurities are released and can just be kind of wiped away. I think, I don't know, I'm not a blacksmith. I have no idea what I'm talking about. Sounds cool, It sounds like a rock album, But that's very much what it felt like. It was very much a kind of a boiling down of like myself and all of my preconceptions and all of the things I thought about myself and about God that weren't necessarily true. And I had to confront that. I had to confront my own ignorance. And then once I'd kind of reached the lowest point, and interestingly enough, we spoke about this a little bit in the last podcast that we did together. My first introduction to Christianity was C.S. Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. And what the Lord did was he brought me back to that. He brought me back to and sorry, I know this isn't exactly what we're talking about. Oh, I will get there, I promise. I'm providing context. I come from a theatrical background, and so I need to, set the scene.
Theatre people, man. I'm married to one, so I understand.
You can't take us anywhere.
No.
But what the Lord did is he brought me back to that kind of that childlike childhood faith. And then I started building new foundations upon that. And basically what I'm saying in all of that is there were times when I felt so alone. There were times when, again, God existing was one of the few things that was certain, but in what form? I don't know. And I certainly couldn't feel him. I certainly couldn't sense his presence. I certainly didn't have any of that sort of the sort of bright, enthusiastic, like, wow, I can feel the Holy Spirit. Let's go, kind of stuff. And when you come from a background or a denomination or a type of, theology that very much focuses on that, it feels like a death. It feels like you're experiencing grief because you haven't got, I think the only way in which I would maybe kind of not contradict you, but maybe sort of soften, I guess, like a little bit of what you're saying is when I agree with the principle that it's like sometimes God is, we're here and we're in our happy little box, everything's fine, and he wants us to be over here. He wants us to go deeper, to go, further up and further in, for all the Narnia nerds. And he pulls that sense of presence away from us to kind of propel us in that direction. I think what can so often happen is that theology that can kind of harden into like, God is testing you, or God is like, is he really going to believe it? It turns into Job, basically, and so like God is just throwing all of these things at us and we're just flailing around and he's like, you're going to have to, it's a sink or swim world out there, kid, And I don't think that's how God is with us. I like you said, God is with us at all times. God is always present. It's only our feeling and our sensing of him that waxes and wanes. And so I kind of just wanted to make that kind of clear in some way, But yeah. Does that answer your question? Is that what you?
I think it does, and I think it goes nicely into the next point that I try and bring out, or Dr. Ko brings out, and that this experience is not just a blanket experience that is the same for everybody else.
Absolutely,
but
yeah.
He says that it's an experience that acts as a mirror to show the reality of one's heart, one's true motivations.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not, God is not going to give us something that we don't need in that moment. He's always going to, and it may not be exactly what we want in that scenario. It may not be what we think he should be doing. But if he does feel distant and you're wrestling with something, we shouldn't interpret that as, well, I guess God's leaving us and we have to figure this out ourselves, and he's only going to come back until we've actually done steps A, B, and C, and now we're in a great position to hear from the Lord and listen to him. That experience may just be a place where God is not withdrawing his presence, but just saying, look, I am wanting you to get into a new relationship with me in a new way that can only be possible if I do just withdraw that infancy side of the relationship. And it's only going to be a reflection, or that experience is only going to be a reflection of what's going on in your particular heart, in your particular instance. I can only use it as an analogy with my 2-year-old. So she's 2.5 now. She has her own opinions. I don't know who allowed her to have her own opinions, but she has her own opinions now. But when she was 2 days old, she had, well, I'm sure she did have opinions, but she didn't have opinions, right? She didn't verbalize things.
Yeah.
She was just,
what am I doing here? What's going on?
5 minutes ago, I was very much comfortable in mummy's tummy, and now I'm in this world where I have to breathe by myself, and I have to scream when I'm hungry because I don't seem to be getting it. If I'm tired,
these people
what
are
do you
looking
mean?
at me all the time, like, what is?
Yeah, Like, I've heard some of your voices before, but you do not
Right.
look like what I thought you were going to look like. Like this is a weird world that I'm in now. And so I have to, there were times when she would just cry and cry. I would have to rock her to sleep and console her. Or when she was hungry, if obviously if my wife wasn't here, I'd get the bottle. If she was hungry, that's my wife's duty to do that. Like there were just things that you just had to do. Now that she's 2.5, she has to now verbalize things for me. I'm not I don't allow an infant scream when she's hungry. No, she doesn't just walk around and just scream. It's like, oh, and now I have to interpret that. It's like, actually, the roles have now flipped. You now have to tell me what's going on, because that's the only way that you can grow. You can't, when you're 25 or whatever, you can't just go to a restaurant and just scream. And like, the waiter now has, that person must be hungry. It doesn't work. That doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a loose analogy, like all analogies are when you're trying to talk about theology. So I'm not saying it's a perfect one, but all I can think is that within those moments, I'm still with my 2-year-old. Obviously I'm going to feed her. If she's crying, I'm not going to say, don't cry, you have to figure it out. If there's something that's wrong, I obviously have to be there. And I think that's the same with God. Like, God is always going to provide for us. He's not going to say, well, I guess you're on your own now because you have to figure this life thing on your own. He's not going to be like that. But there may be times when we don't get our way anymore. It's like, well, Lord, this was really easy before. I felt like you were giving me steps A, B, and C. Like, to give an analogy and an example now in my life, when my wife and I were just starting in our marriage, and as you know, Tim, coming from the UK to the US, you have to start from zero upwards. Like as an immigrant that goes from you can't work to okay, now you can work to okay, but you've got to wait a few more years until you become a citizen or whatever, that process there. So I was going through that, my wife and I was, and we had nothing, like literally zero. And we had to just start from the bottom up. And all we could do was trust God. All we could do was believe God had a plan for us because we had nothing else. So it was really easy. It was easier then than it is now, going through that journey, because it was so easy to just trust on the Lord because we didn't have anything and we had no other option. And looking back, it was such a wonderful time of the Lord for 3 years, just walking with us and just showing us how to believe him and how to trust in him and to not get so bogged down in the setbacks, because we had like many setbacks that time when we thought we were going to slowly get out of this, and then it actually wasn't. It was like, but we never got discouraged in those moments, and it was great. And it was, wow, it was so beyond us, because we were literally had no idea how the Lord was going to get us from where we were to where we wanted to be, and not anything drastic, but literally just to like have our own place, even if it was just renting an apartment, like something just basic as that. And it was really hard, but it didn't feel hard in the process. Looking back on it, it's like, that was hard, but it didn't feel that way. Now, when we are in a much better place than we were, it's felt like it's been even harder to trust God, and it's been harder to seek out his presence and to feel his presence, and it feels as if he's withdrawing from me, and it was really difficult. But looking back on it, and I'm not saying that this is a perfect step-by-step guide that's going to speak to everybody. All I can say is it spoke to me. All I can say is that looking back, I can get encouragement from this and think that perhaps where I'm in right now, God hasn't withdrawn his presence. He's as close as he's ever been. He's just withdrew that infant consolation in order for me now to go into a deeper sphere of his presence. And that is going to open up so many other amazing things in that relationship. And it's just going to go even deeper and even further. And when I read that, I thought that is such a good example and a good explanation of what I'm going through now. So if there's anybody that's watching this that's going through this as well, I hope that it is an encouragement to you. If it doesn't feel like that this is speaking to you, think about different experiences in your life that perhaps you can relate to this. That's just where I am at with this right now. And I thought it was such a profound point to make. And in step 3, as we get closer to the end of the podcast this week, he says that this is not a withdrawing of the presence of the Spirit, but rather the Spirit drawing near in truth, apart from feeling. We love feelings, but you have to go beyond that to show the person the true state of some of the vice elements of the character, of how the person is not truly filled with the Spirit in those places of the heart, and how they need to more deeply depend on God. And this is what I say, this is a key takeaway, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. That God's absence is not absence at all. He is always present. He's simply calling you to a deeper level of maturity and a deeper level of faith.
Yes.
And that just resonates so much more. God is not distance. He's always here. He's just taking you to another level.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it speaks to how we tend to focus very much, at least, my sort of the Christian world I've lived in has focused very much on like all the good stuff. So we have like, we talk about all those times when we did feel how the Spirit of God was with us. And like, with your guys' situation, like how you felt, you had such momentum with the Holy Spirit, like you had no means to provide for yourselves, but the Lord was guiding you, the Lord was there. And we focus on those things to such an extent that when those things stop happening, or when, you things, improve a bit, and then suddenly you feel bereft. We don't really have a way of talking about that. We don't have a vocabulary. We haven't, our churches haven't given us the words to express what that means, And I think that, I think absolutely, yeah. I think that in so many cases it is like, it's not just a, okay, here, like, let's take the training wheels off you go. It is that, in so many ways, that's a necessary part of the Christian walk. It's like, okay, how do I live? How do I relate to God when things aren't going poorly? When I don't have to absolutely rely on Him for everything? When I have, physical, worldly means of looking after myself, what does my relationship with God look like then? Because like any other relationship, there's seasons, and you're relating in one way in one season and a different way in another. And I think in many ways that sense, that desolation is God taking that next step and saying, okay, how are we going to relate to each other here? But I think as well, what really stands out to me is that there is always, like, the Lord is always present in every circumstance, in every emotion, in every place and season of our lives, And so I think when you are feeling that sense of separation, I think it's okay to feel it, It's okay to experience that feeling. It's okay to have that sense of like, okay, I know that this isn't how I am. I know that you haven't left me, Lord, but this is how I feel. Mm-hmm. And how am I going to deal with that? How am I going to process that? Am I going to have faith that actually I believe that you are with me, even though I feel like this, And I believe that you will comfort me, even though I feel uncomforted. And I feel bereft, and I feel like you're distant, or, whatever. I love that the church as a whole, Big C, has language to describe that, and has language to say, like, God will not give you tests. He will not say like, oh, okay, are you going to, how's he going to do with his finances? But when those times of difficulty come, and those times where those times come when it feels like he has taken a step back, it will be used for your growth. Does that make sense? Like he will turn it into a time of growth and understanding. And I mean, for me personally, like the previous situation I described, where I was like starting from scratch more or less in my faith, that feeling of separation compelled me to search. It compelled me to actually do my due diligence with, doctrines and theologies and preachers and all these things that I just kind of taken in and hadn't really been particularly, what's the word I'm looking for? Hadn't been particularly, considerate in terms of like delving into like, do I actually believe this? Is this scripturally sound? What does scripturally sound even mean? And that separation, that feeling of separation meant that I was searching, I was looking, I was trying to figure things out. And the Lord used that in some wonderful ways. And eventually I did. I felt that connection again. I felt that moment of peace where the Lord was like, welcome back, and then it went again, because that's how life works, But I think, yeah.
Yeah, and to use my loose analogy again, to not make such a formula out of it.
Absolutely.
That when a mother nurses her infant, or when I used to get the bottle and feed Kaya, there is, and my sister actually did this. She did her degree in child development, and she did some research on this, so I can't say this is my work. But she said she was looking at some studies that said there's so much that goes on in a child's brain, an infant's brain, when you feed them and you look into their eyes, and that's like even the dad can have that connection too. So when they are older, as in my 2-year-old now, there was something going on in their brain that they look to you now as, oh, they're my provider, they're my protector, they're my source of love, and they're my source of comfort. So when we perhaps are in the phase where God has removed that infant consolation away from us, the experiences of that time are still there with us.
Yeah.
They're still present in our life, and we can learn from them. It's like, okay, well, what was it like, Lord, when you were teaching me?
Yeah.
Okay, let's try and use those spiritual disciplines and now allow you to nuance them into more deeper and more beautiful ways. Yeah. So it's not, okay, he's left, he's removed that from you, and now that's in the past, and that's no longer necessary. No, it's still a part of your experience and part of your life. And if you are, like you said, if you're feeling difficulty, like, oh, Lord, I don't think you are present right now. Well, it's amazing. And we've talked about the Psalms a little bit on these podcasts we've done here. He's given us a whole prayer book called the Psalms, that when he does feel distance from us, we can not just say, okay, well, I guess that must just be the phase of life I'm in now. No, like you said, it's okay to feel that way. Right. Don't reject it, embrace that, and incorporate that now in the next phase that you're now in with the Lord, and allow that to be a natural part of you. I wanted to, before I end, I just wanted to make sure that, if there was anything else that was on your heart that you thought you wanted to say before we close.
No, I mean, I think that, you put it into words perfectly, honestly. So I don't know how much I could really add to it. I feel like it would just be extra fluff,
Yeah, just more, right? Just yeah.
But yeah, I think that it's a really, it's a really beautiful thing to know, to not just like know mentally, but to have the knowledge that like church fathers over 1,000 years ago wrestled with this same thing. This is a universal truth of the Christian walk, and I think that helps kind of ground it in a really, really beautiful way. And it kind of lends some sort of almost perspective of eternity into the current, very temporary feeling, problem, however you want to describe it, you know. I think that's pretty much the only addition I'd make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we hope that it was some encouragement to you. If it wasn't, that's fine too. I hope you had maybe something that you could take from this. But all I wanted to emphasize in this blog post and in this podcast is this: that if you feel like God is distant from you in any way, shape, or form, he's not. He may feel far away, but perhaps he is as close as he has ever been. Perhaps he's closer than he ever has been before. And it's just a different part of the relationship that he wants you to draw into so he can get to know you and get to love you, and that he can then allow a space for you to get to know him and get to know him even deeper and love him even more. That if you're in this place right now, that God, where are you? Perhaps he's right there, knocking on the door of your heart to get you into a new place and into a different place that he wants you to be, because he's a loving father and he cherishes a relationship with you. So I will leave you with that. If you wanted to engage with us, let us know in the comments down below if what you've been thinking, if there's things that you want us to pray for you or pray with you. That's what we want to do at the King's Coalition. We are Christians from all different denominations and backgrounds and viewpoints and things, and we have our essential doctrines and our essential stuff, but we are all here trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus. So we thank you for watching, thank you for engaging with this week's content, and we will see you in the next podcast episode.